Clear prop.
Star 73, Cherokee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic as always. This is the first time we've recorded live in some time. We have gotten in the habit of doing it in remote cities, but we are in my office in Houston, Texas today. Wally's going to conduct a check ride after this podcast episode. And yesterday during a check ride, he had a few things happen that we're going to discuss today and make you all a little bit better. We're going to talk about the Aviator's Toolbox and why you should bring it all with you to your check ride. Wally, what was your experience yesterday with that applicant?
Well, the scenario that, or one of the many scenarios I like to give is we're flying along and we're going to our destination, and our destination is probably our fuel stop. It's an intermediate stop onto our ultimate destination. But anyway, we've got maybe a 300-mile flight, a 3-hour flight or so, and I bring up the scenario of, okay, we are about 75% of the way there, maybe 220 miles into the flight, and we both really have to use the restroom. So we decide to stop short of our fuel stop. So we pick an airport, and so this is an airport off the sectional that the applicant was, probably not extremely familiar with, but that's the reason is to get into the sectional, get into the data, what runways do we have, how long is the runway, the elevation, what the weather is, what the current weather is at that airport right now, and oh, by the way, based on that temperature, about approximately what altitude would the freezing level be at. And if it's a non-controlled airport, based on the winds, what runway would we expect, and all that kind of stuff. So we get into all that. And so, again, the scenario is, okay, so we go in there, we land, and everything's fine. We use the restroom, we decide to get some fuel. And then the person at the FBO tells us that there's a really good restaurant right down the street, and they've got a crew car. So they convince us that maybe it's the appropriate thing to go get some lunch. So we jump in the car, we go down the street, and we get some lunch. We come back to the airport maybe an hour or so later, and we go out to the airplane, and we get in the airplane, and the applicant looks down and goes, "Oh no, I left the master switch on." And while probably unrealistic that leaving the master switch on for an hour would drain the battery completely, in our case it does drain the battery completely. So we have a electrically dead airplane. And I say, well, what are we going to do? And in this case, the applicant, he struggled with what to do. And there was some awkward silence, and he finally said, I said, okay, well, this is the situation. I mean, here we are. What are we doing? He finally said I would call somebody. And I said, okay, well then call somebody. So he picks up his phone and he calls his CFI. I'm thinking, well, okay, it's using your resources. And what does his CFI say other than to hand prop the airplane? And I said, okay, so we're going to hand prop the airplane. Who's going to hand prop it? Because in our scenario, I'm not a pilot. I'm just a passenger. So am I the passenger who's never been in a small airplane? Am I going to hand prop it while the applicant stays at the controls? Or is the applicant going to hand prop it while the guy who's never been in a small airplane stays at the controls? And, he really doesn't know how to answer that. And I do throw in there that the one and only time I tried to hand prop a 172, I got a torn rotator cuff out of it. So probably not something that we want to do. Unless you are basically trained for it, somebody who's really shown you how to do it. You know, in the smaller airplanes, a Piper Cub that has a 65 horsepower engine, you know, it's a lot easier to hand prop it than an airplane that maybe has a 160 horsepower engine. So anyway, we go on, and you know, I just tell him that I'm not really comfortable being part of hand propping an airplane. And after this whole scenario played out, it took about 45 minutes. He finally found in the POH that there's a checklist for this particular airplane that says starting engine using external power. And that's all I was getting. That's all I wanted. I mean, we should have been done with this question about 45 minutes ago. And during the debrief, you know, my point that I was making to him is the POH is part of your toolbox. And just like your toolbox in your garage, you know, I pretty much know what tools I have in my toolbox. I know if I'm working on some project at home and I need a rubber mallet, I know I have one in the toolbox. Now, 6 months ago, I didn't have one, and I needed one, and I knew it required a trip to the hardware store to buy that rubber mallet. But now I know I have it, and I see a breakdown of applicants not knowing what resources are available to them, and that's where the term toolbox comes from. Many years ago, I was an instructor on the 727. And I used to tell my students at that time that maybe one of the things that's really good to study is actually the table of contents of each section of the flight manual, the abnormal. At the time, we had an abnormal section, we had an emergency section, and we had a normal section. And I'd say maybe just knowing what's in there is important. Just like, you know, if you go to I don't know, you rent an Airbnb and maybe you want to cook some food. Maybe it's a good idea to go in the pantry to see what's in the pantry so you get an idea of what you can cook.
And I think what I remember vividly being overwhelmed by how many resources there were. I remember not knowing what the resources could provide for me. And hopefully that's what we're going to share with everyone today. Hopefully you can create your own little cheat sheet, your own little toolbox of things that can be available for your use during both everyday flying and check rides as you need them to help you be a better pilot. I think the home run here is POH. We've done a show specifically on the POH, so we won't spend a ton of time there, but go back and listen to that episode. And it's everything about the POH. It's all the sections, it's all the details, how it all ties together, why they're written the way they're written. All POHs now are written with the same sections in the same order to help pilots quickly find the information. But as Wally said, you really need to understand what is in there and available to you. I remember recently going to this type rating that, man, I heeded your warning, and I at least knew everything that was in that book. I didn't maybe read every paragraph to its full extent, but I probably should have, but I knew everything that was in there for me to use if I needed to use it, and that was very beneficial to me. The procedures in general that are in the POH are important, as you said, right? Some of these are checklists. Some of these are things that you use to create weight and balance. You create, your performance charts for what you need as it relates to runway links for both takeoffs and landings. But there's other procedures that may be created. At this flight school, we have a procedure on the back of every clipboard that is how to clean a fouled spark plug. That's a very common occurrence at an airport at almost sea level, and people don't quite lean it enough when they're slowly rolling out to the run-up area. And they get to the run-up area, and the mag check, the ignition switch check, comes off with some numbers that don't meet the POH limitations. So the exercise is right there on the back of the clipboard. That if you follow that procedure, I'm going to bet 99 times out of 100 you can clean the little carbon deposits off those spark plugs and make that a successful flight.
That's a great example, because you don't have to know the procedure. You just have to know that the reference for the procedure is on the back of the clipboard. You don't have to know that it's 2,200 or I don't even know. I don't even know what the RPM for your airplanes for this procedure is, but I know the procedure is there, and you
know where you're going to find it.
Exactly.
Well, and if you were in a check ride with a student, and the student says 80 on the left, 80 on the right, and that's good, and they're going to go, you're probably observing, making sure they go back to both, and you feel good about it. Somebody does it and it drops 250, they're going to look at you, and you're going to look at them, and they're going to wonder, what do I do? And hopefully at this school we've taught them to flip that clipboard over, go through that procedure. I think as an examiner or an evaluator, you're going to be impressed that they know what to do. Not that they had that memorized or could articulate it bullet for bullet, but that they knew where to get the information.
Absolutely. One thing that comes up, if you've listened to this show a couple times, my passion for electrical system abnormalities is pretty high. But one thing that I will almost always talk about, especially in Cessnas that has electric flaps, is landing with an electrical system failure and coming up with runway length data for a no-flap landing. And the fact is that some airplanes don't have the data. They just don't have it. I think, I've given a lot of minutes of my life while the applicant is going through looking for the data to see how much more runway they're going to need for a no-flap landing. And if you're in an older model Cessna 172, 172N, I believe, and earlier, there's no reference to a no-flap landing. Now, the more modern airplanes will have a note to add a certain amount of percentage for a no-flap landing. But I think it's just important that you know that. I used the example when we were talking earlier of we're all very comfortable with going and jumping in a rental car, and we look to see, how do we start the car? Does it have a key or does it have a push button? We put it in drive and away we go. And 10 miles down the road, we are in a driving rainstorm, and then we're scrambling trying to figure out how to turn the windshield wipers on. And we can laugh about it a little bit, but most of us have probably been in a similar situation. I know I have, and there's times where I thought, geez, I wish I knew where the windshield wipers were before I needed them. But I feel like we do that in airplanes, and it's a recipe for disaster. It really is a recipe for not a good outcome.
Yeah, so you might want to know where those switches and buttons are. What are some other resources? I think we're both fond of the AIM, and we've talked about the AIM a lot on here on this show. The AIM's got a ton of great information in there. There's a pilot controller glossary for all the phraseology we need to use on the radio. Lots of really good stuff in the AIM. Again, it'd be a great book if you had time to read all of it, but probably something that you should just know what the contents are in the AIM.
Absolutely.
I think you have an example that you like to use with your applicants at times.
Yeah, I have a pet, I don't know if you call it a pet peeve, or I think that we don't do a great job with aircraft call signs. And what I hear a lot of times on check rides is ground November 123 Alpha Bravo, ready to taxi from Joe's Flight School. And they call themselves November 123 Alpha Bravo. And the AIM clearly states that civil aircraft should, doesn't say shall, it says should, but I will say at my airline, we actually define what should means and what shall means. Should is basically shall unless you have a compelling reason not to do it. So I think that's the way we should look at it. If the AIM says you should do it, well, you should do it. But anyway, we want to say the aircraft type, or at least according to the AIM, the manufacturer's name or the aircraft type. Now, I believe aircraft type is better because it tells the controller what kind of performance capability we have. If we say Skyhawk, he knows we're probably about a 100-knot cruise airplane. We're probably about a 70-knot approach airplane. If we say Skylane, he probably knows we're about a 125-knot cruise airplane, maybe a 80-knot approach airplane. But they know the performance capabilities of the airplanes. And so this is a debrief item that we'll get back in after a check ride, and I'll say, so what is our call sign? And the applicant will say, it's November 123 Alpha Bravo. And I'll say, okay, what does the AIM say our call sign should be? And I'm processing paperwork at this point, and I would say 90% of the applicants can't find it in the AIM, what our call sign should be. Now, if they were to Google FAA AIM call signs, I'd be fine. Now, Google would probably tell you where to find it. Now go to the AIM and actually read the section that says civil aircraft should state their aircraft type or manufacturer's name, followed by the digits and letters. And when the aircraft type is used, you drop the N, the November. Because we're not really saying a whole lot by saying November. We're saying that we're a U.S. registered airplane, and there's a bunch of U.S. registered airplanes. We're not really narrowing things down. So it's just that the tool is in the toolbox, but they're not looking in the fifth drawer. They're looking in the first, second, and third drawer, and that rubber mallet is in the fifth drawer. And it's just... it's I don't know, it's a test of my patience to sit there and watch this, especially when my next applicant is standing outside the door and we're trying to get things moving so we can get 2 check rides done today.
Yeah, that section is 4-2-4 in the AIM, and it's a great page and a half of information. Talks about student pilots and that the FAA wants to help student pilots and they should add student pilot at the end of it. It's very beneficial. And again, maybe you don't read every word of the AIM, but it sure would be nice if you knew what those titles and sections were called so you could find that information. The AIM's part of a book normally that we would purchase with the FAR in front of it, the Federal Aviation Regulations. I can remember as a student, my instructor saying, which section is the section on certification? Which section is the section on operating? And I'm like, I don't know. I remember now I talk to new people. I talk to people in our orientations all the time about 61 and 141 of the certifications. 91's operating. United uses 121 for their operating. And it's just because I've been around it so much. Right. I understand it and know it now. But if I was a good student pilot, I probably could have read the sections and understood what the titles were, right? 141 is actually called pilot schools, but it is the certification under which people can get certified for Part 141. But as it relates to the federal regulations, way too much for us to dive into today, but lots of real good information in the book for pilots that would help you probably answer questions that Wally or another DP might ask you. At least know where to go look for them. If he asked you what are the hour requirements for nighttime for a student pilot that did not train Part 141, that would be in Part 61. If you looked in 91, you will never find that information. And just
Right.
having that logic of what the sections are, what information's in there, it would be very useful.
Yeah, and I think maybe actually reading the regulation rather than memorizing the answers is a really good thing. And this is something that comes out a lot. I ask about currency. So we're talking about a private pilot candidate. And I will say, okay, tell me what you need in regards to currency. And they'll say, well, 3 takeoffs and landings within the previous 90 days. I go, okay, good. And I will say, what are the limitations as far as the airplane? And a lot of them will say, has to be in the same type. I said, okay, so if we had 3 takeoffs and landings in a Warrior within the last 90 days, and we're in a 172 today, it wouldn't work, right? And they'd say, well, let me look that up, and they'll pull out the FAR, and it basically says you need to have 3 takeoffs and landings, and I'm paraphrasing. I'm not reading from the FAR, but it says 3 takeoffs and landings in the same category and class and type, and they stop right there. But there's more to the sentence, because and type is followed by a comma, and after that comma it says if a type rating is required. Okay, so they're lulled into thinking that yes, it does have to be in the same type, and they've looked it up. And if you stop the sentence right there, yes, it sounds like it has to be in the same type, but it says same category and class and type if a type rating is required. And of course, we all know we don't need a type rating to fly a Cessna 172 or a Piper Warrior. So yes, a 172, 3 takeoffs and landings would suffice for a Warrior.
Tons of other great resources out there that we've probably talked about in different ways, but lots of handbooks. If you go to the FAA website and search aviation handbooks, you're going to find more than you can possibly imagine about reading. They have risk management. They've got all kinds of stuff out there. For the private student, you really should become acquainted with the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge and the Airplane Flying Handbook. Both have great resources, great information in there. And again, maybe not read every word. You should if you have time, but know the sections, know where the maneuvers are, know where the systems are, know where things like transitioning to high-performance aircraft is located. You'll benefit greatly from that information and just the knowledge that there's places to turn to when you need that. DP might ask you questions about the airport, the facilities at an airport. You're going to find all that information in the chart supplement. There's a book called the Aeronautical Chart Supplement Guide, and that's the chart supplement, the actual book for the chart supplement. That's where the airport information is. But you can find out a lot of information if you look at the aeronautical chart book as well, because every symbol, every thing is going to be in there. And if Wally asks me if this airport has fuel, I can use the legend, I can use that book. They're all FAA's documents. Now, DP might not say you go look in that book, because you might have looked up 900 other things, and they might not be too confident that you know everything that you need to know. But there's tons and tons of resources in that handbook section. Go download those, put them in your electronic flight bag, buy them, tab them out, fold pages, keep the information at your fingertips. Obviously, an electronic flight bag, we talk about ForeFlight a lot, but there are some other ones out there. If you have an electronic flight bag, make sure you know how to use it and what resources it's providing for you. Obviously, tons of weather information, tons of this chart data is going to be in your E6B or EFB, and you're going to be able to know where to turn to find that information if you need it. And Wally might ask you questions about that electronic flight bag, just like any other resource that you're using, and you should know how it's going to work.
Yeah, I was doing I think it was, I'm not sure what, it was probably a private check ride several weeks ago, and I start out by trying to orient myself as to the cross country we're given. I give a cross country that's far enough away to where it is probably going to require a fuel stop. And so I'll say to the applicant, okay, where are we going for our first fuel stop? And he'll say, we're going to ABC Airport. Okay. How far is it from here to ABC? And, I usually expect the applicant to pretty quickly tell me it's 286 miles or whatever it is. Well, this young man was doing all kinds of math, and boy, he pulled out the calculator. He's adding this and this and this, and he came up with a number that just didn't make sense. I forgot what the number was, but I queried him about it, and I said, "You sure that's right? That doesn't seem right." Anyway, we got into it, and I because when he told me we're going from here to ABC Airport, I've got ForeFlight open on my iPad. First thing I do is put it in there, and I know that it's 214 miles. And he was giving me numbers that were way off. And he made the comment to me that, yeah, he says, I have ForeFlight, but I wish I knew how to use it. And this particular flight school didn't put a big emphasis on using it. And I was like, oh, geez, that's like going to the ER for a diagnostic situation. I mean, you're sick, and the doctor come in and say, yeah, we got this fancy machine that would tell us what's wrong with you, but I don't know how to use it. I found it a head scratcher. He ended up doing all right, not using ForeFlight, but he had it on his iPad, and at the end during the debrief, I just really suggested to him that maybe a few tutorials on how to use ForeFlight might be time well spent.
I think they only have like 1 million videos out there on every feature, every button, every switch in the system.
Yeah.
So you can get knowledgeable, and I think one of the downsides in flight training today that I work every day to try and get it out of our system is the impression of what your flight instructor believes is important is the golden rule. And that's not necessarily always correct. Not every flight instructor knows everything about everything in aviation. So don't always necessarily believe what they say. Challenge them, hold them accountable, go do your own review, ask another flight instructor, find a mentor, maybe 2 guys that host a podcast. Do something so that you can ultimately make sure that the answers and the advice that they're giving you is accurate, because it might not always be true if it's just passed from mouth to ear. The ACS, we've talked about that a lot. Airman Certification Standards documents for your specific rating that you're trying to get, or certificate that you're trying to get, is a great resource to understand what's expected of you. It is literally the key to an open book test called the check ride. And you should be able to go through and read that ACS from front to back. There's tons of checklists, how to come prepared. It's a great tool, and I think too many people focus on the flying components, meaning 100 feet above or below, 10, 20 degrees off my heading. They think about the flying stuff. They don't think about the knowledge stuff, right? You know what you have to know. And there's going to be scenarios in that book that Wally and other DPEs are going to challenge you on. And they're right there. If you can't answer those questions in your own head, you need to know where the resources are in your toolbox to be able to get to those answers.
Yeah.
And without that knowledge, it's like carrying around a toolbox with a lock on it and you don't have the combination or the key. Yeah. It's just a wasted box of stuff if you can't get in there and use it.
Right.
As I was flipping through the AIM a while ago when we were preparing for this, the back of the book, I'd noticed that the NASA reporting information was in the back, and I thought, man, that's a great resource that maybe people don't know about, and exactly what a NASA report does for pilots. And I think it's important for you to know. When I had my near miss, I should have filed a NASA report. I never did. No one taught me. I didn't know back then what I should have done. I asked a lot of people, and no one told me back then. I preach it a lot around here that if something happens and you feel like others should learn from it or know of it, filing a NASA report is both good for general aviation in general, but it also has some protection mechanisms in there for you. If you didn't intentionally do it, it might save you from getting in a lot of trouble. If you do get in a lot of trouble, no guarantees, but it is definitely a factor in their decision making. So lots of stuff out there, lots of tools you can have in your toolbox, things that the DPE may or may not let you use to its fullest extent, but they I would suspect if you only need to look up a few things, that DP is going to let you look up a few things no matter what.
Yeah, I would suspect that as well.
So I had an idea, and I think we're going to try and implement this in our new episodes. But the idea that I had was that Wally would start asking me a couple check ride like questions. I would protest to be a good private student ready for my check ride, or whatever rating we want to pick on that day. And so Wally's going to ask me a couple check ride questions that probably include my need to have my toolbox ready, and we'll pull those things out and use them appropriately. So Wally, I'm nervous. I think I'm ready. I don't know what you're going to ask me, but fire away.
Okay, so let's say we're flying along and we're on our cross country, and we get to a situation where we have a little systems problem. Not major, not like an engine failing, but let's say we have an alternator failure, and we decide that we're going to land the airplane, and we pick an airport that has 2,800 foot runway length, and we go in and land, and we end up they have maintenance there, and the maintenance people take care of the airplane, and let's say it's a high elevation airport. Let's say we're out in New Mexico and it's 4,800 feet and it's summertime, it's hot. And so now we want to take off. And how are we going to find out? First of all, can we take off under these conditions? We'll say it's, 28 degrees Celsius, 4,800 foot airport elevation. And can we take off from a 2,800 foot long runway?
Well, I wouldn't know that from memory, so I would pull out my POH. I would go to the performance section, and I would look at the performance charts for takeoffs. Okay. And I would look at, there's going to be a line with an altitude of the airport elevation, and there's going to be temperatures that are going to guide my answer or guide my fingers. I'm going to try to correlate those two things, that airport elevation, that temperature, and see if it's under 2,800 feet. And in my safety mechanism, I would have personal minimums for what additional runway I would want in case anything were to happen. But if my performance chart said I had 2,000 feet and I felt like 800 feet was the add-on for my personal minimums, then I would tell you we could take off and go. Okay.
All right. Good. And, I might expand on that, and I say, well, what if I don't know, this is an unusual situation, but, we could talk about temperature. I mean, obviously we can't control the temperature, but we can take advantage of when the temperature might be cooler. Maybe we need to spend the night and get up at 6 in the morning and take off when it's 20 degrees rather than 28 degrees.
I had a very similar question like that on my Vision Jet type rating check ride, and it was a no-go. And he said, well, when can we go? And I said, when the temperature gets to 24 degrees. And that's where the math works and where my safety mechanism fits. And that could be waiting until the evening, or in that case, we could have spent the night and left in the morning as well.
All right. Okay, so here's another scenario. Let's say we go out and we go to an uncontrolled airport 30 miles away from us, and we're out there, we're doing touch and goes. We're by ourselves, and then we're making all our announcements, so-and-so traffic, Skyhawk 123 Alpha Bravo, left base, runway 18, touch and go. And then we see another airplane show up on our ADSB in on our 4 flight, and all of a sudden they've joined us in the traffic pattern, but they're not talking. It's possible they don't have a radio, but they're not talking. That's okay, because we're doing our thing. We're making all our announcements. And then lo and behold, another airplane comes in, and geez, they're not talking either. And, you just get to the point where you say, well, okay, I've had enough of this. I've done 5 or 6 landings. I'm good to go back to my home airport. And so you announce that you're leaving the pattern. You leave the pattern. you go to turn, and let's say the CTAF at that given airport was 122.9, and you're going back to your Class D airport, and you go in to tune in the ATIS. You reach up, you realize that you are on 122.925, 122.92. You are on the wrong frequency, so you were the one that was in the wrong, not the other two. Now, were they broadcasting? We don't know because we weren't on the frequency, so we can't prove anything. But you're actually the one that was in the wrong. What would you do? Or is there anything you could do or anything you would do?
Well, one, I'd start trying to second check, do multiple checks when I'm on the frequency, but I think that's a great use for the NASA report. And I think that's a great opportunity for me as a pilot to sit down and file a NASA report, explain the situation, explain my mistake, declare that I made that mistake. And hopefully if those other airplanes reported me, they probably could have saw my tail number. If they reported me and the FAA got involved, the FAA would probably see my NASA report, and it would be some piece of protection for me as a pilot to not get a pilot deviation or something that would go on my record. And then help other pilots. If you go out and read NASA reports, you can see the mistakes that pilots are making. We incorporate that into our training here. We look at NASA reports that are filed in the 30 nautical mile radius around us and try and discuss those at safety meetings so that we can all learn from other people's mistakes so that it doesn't happen to us.
Yeah.
So I would file a NASA report.
Okay, good. And along those lines, at my airline, I mean, we tailor our training and our checking events to incidents that happen in the real world. When I was a 727 instructor years ago, one of my side jobs, we all had different jobs other than just instructing. You kind of had an administrative job. One of my jobs was to keep a database of all these reports that we had internally at our airline. And you'd go through and you'd see, geez, in the last... I don't know, I'm just making this up, but let's say in the last 6 months, we've had 4 B system hydraulic failures. And so maybe in our scenarios that we come up with, maybe, if you look at the data and you go over the last couple of years, we've had, X number of B system failures and 0 A system failures. Now, does it mean that we don't train and check the A system failures? No, but maybe it's more worthwhile to put more emphasis on the B system failures, the ones that are really failing out there in the real world.
For sure. No question. Well, as always, great show, Wally, and enjoyed recording in person for the first time in quite some time. And if you're listening, thanks for listening. Share the show with a friend, and if we've earned it, give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks as always, and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.